So today we're going to take a little trip into composition. Annican is in my composition class online, and but he asked me this. I think maybe even before, maybe somewhere in the middle of our class. But he's asking, which is a pretty wise thing to ask, actually. Could you share any insights? And let me blow this screen up. Could you share any insights on? There we go. Composition, such as what you personally prefer, and any evolution you know of in your own work. Who would be your top picks for strongest design and composition in paintings? There's a couple little points I probably want to make there before I say much of anything else, and that is that uh, the first one is what you personally prefer and any evolution you know of in your own work. I want to go back to that one question that I had from the very beginning. In fact, let me show you. Let me show you a picture because it really sums up. Oh, where'd I go with that? There it is. It really sums up where I came from as far as being a student at the Art Students League, which was my beginning. And but what I did at least multiple times a week, probably minimally once a week, but many times, I went to the Metropolitan Museum with a design theory, with an idea about composition and trying to figure it out based on the paintings in the Museum of Fine Arts. And I discovered two key things. One is a lot of the paintings in the Museum of Fine Arts aren't that impressive compositionally. And now, again, remember, I'm talking about to a layman, to a young student who doesn't know anything. And don't ever underestimate your responsibilities that way. When you don't know anything, you have a responsibility to react as a person who doesn't know anything. Just look at it and don't say, not good because I know this or that. Just look at it and say, that just isn't it. And or say, that has something. And what I did, as I've mentioned to you before, is I collected postcards, and I would put them side by side and have a collection of maybe 20 postcards. And I would find something new, something I'd never seen before. And of course, my emphasis was always on composition. And I would bring them into this stack, and I would hold them up with these other 20, and I would simply say, who goes? Is this guy good enough to push somebody out? And this is me with no knowledge. So somebody else asked that. I don't know. Maybe it was Annican, but somebody else asked that too about whether, in a sense, who I think I am, saying, uh, making a decision like that. But the answer is you have nobody to go with but your own reactions, but your own instincts, but your own senses, and so you go. And I say that meaning I frankly would rather have done that than have been given this book full of, oh, it's all pyramids or it's all S curves or some other thing. Composition is. I'm very pleased to have done that. For one thing, it gave me a look of, a very eclectic look, because I looked at a lot of different compositions. I was in the room with the Oriental stuff, and all the way through the various histories and schools that the Metropolitan has, and so there was this, and by doing that, I began to have this sort of universal sense. I was looking for what is that thing that they all have in common. So those are the sort of the great advantages of being that way. So I spent my time there, and I kept coming back to Veronese, which is who you're looking at here. Something I thought maybe I could handle. That looked like it was within the reach. Of course, it was also sort of what we were doing. You were doing figures fairly up close at the Art Students. Like there was no landscapes in a building like that, or great distances you could work from. So maybe that's part of the reason it sort of formed a bit of a model. I had some other favorites, Tintoretto and others, but Poussin. I can't remember who all the other ones were. Any evolution I know of in my own work. That was the second point I was going to make there. So, evolution in my own work. Well, when I was at the Art Students League, all I ever heard anything about was it's not balanced. The composition isn't balanced, and you'd have conversations about big airy gaps on one side of the figure or the other. Of course, all you had was a figure, maybe a chair, figure and a chair to work with, for the most part. So there was a sense of equilibrium in the picture, which I didn't have a word for at the time. Some people use a word like repose, which can be used in other ways, multiple ways. But that's one of those things you learn to do. If a figure looks like it's about to fall out of the painting, it is. In other words, it's going to be uncomfortable for everybody else too. And I say if your center of interest does, but I don't think I ever heard the word center of interest. I don't remember ever setting anything up or having anything set up at the Art Students League to feature anything by color, for example, or anything. I know that when I was a monitor in one of the classes, we just we just we just did stuff. I don't remember ever having anybody say set it up like this, and that's a significant thing that you'd be missing. If you're not working with somebody who actually, for example, is a portrait painter and is being responsible for what his students are ingesting or not getting. So, but so the evolution of my work was like that, and so it followed logically that I would have to spend tons of time at the museum. And as I said, I'd come in there with an idea about what composition is, and what a good composition looked like. And I eventually, by looking and looking and looking, and just using this practice of elimination, gradually having a comfort zone with ones that sing and ones that don't. I don't think I used the word sing at the time. We used to use words like magic. That was one of those young student things. Which one has the composition, or which one has magic? But yeah. So, but composition, composition is that, given the way you get, by the time composition was one thing first, just the arrangement of stuff on a page. You could just say that, right? Arrangement of people in a room, in a setting. And then you'd have this thing about to tell a story, or what, to make a nice arrangement, and various things. But by the time, of course, you get to the Velázquez, the Impressionist mindset, you start realizing that what people have been doing, even though didn't have terms for it, and were primarily apparently trying to make stories, was they were designing by spots. In other words, the balance was the equilibrium of the weight of a powerhouse of light in relation to, say, a big dark somewhere else in the picture, or in relation to other lights. So. But as I said, we didn't hear much, so I was just down there doing that, and who knows what it got for me. But by the time I got to Gamel, which is, let's see if this computer is going to actually act slow today. Come on, computer, move over. Okay. Here it is. Hopefully it'll stay there. So this is the Veronese. This is the kind of thing I'd be looking at, and lots of others. I remember going to the Frick and other places, seeing some Vermeers, and so on. But I couldn't have told you much. I couldn't have told you much about what I knew, and I certainly couldn't have told you much about anything I knew for sure. There was always these interesting ideas about Hogarth's line of beauty, or the pyramid, or the things that you would sort of read. You'd read stuff in books, but I never found any of it to be really strong and foundational. That it really set me on a track. So. And so one of the pictures, actually, if you look at the one with me being interviewed by Alistair, that video, you'll see there's a figure in a room just completely, out of balance, doesn't make any sense precisely. Probably I was trying to venture into something else, but you can see that there's some aspects of composition are not considered. By the time I get to Gamel's conversation was about pattern. His favorite word was pattern, I think. He talked about fascinating patterns or interesting patterns. And of course, the pattern idea is a spot idea, but its shape's sort of made out of cutouts. That's really more, to be more precise. And I think he used it roughly. I don't think he meant it in a strict cutout way, like you say the Greek vase that Ang talks about in the patterns. But so when I got to Gamel, the the first one I did, I've shown you before, and oops, I'm going the wrong way. Why is this being so slow today? There we go. So the first one in the upper left is the first one I did with Gamel, and that was one because I was influenced by pattern, and having watched his work, I immediately set up in a sort of a way that was being influenced by his confrontation, whatever it is, that experience of being around his stuff. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of that. But I'm guessing about virtually everything, and Gamel's not giving me any words. He would say things like, "Don't neglect your diagonals," but that's pretty not. that's seriously short of telling you something that you would really understand. The fact is, in paintings, of course, the diagonal is the life of the painting. Given that there's a frame, a structure that's vertical and horizontal, any diagonal line is going to take over if everything else in it is vertical, because they will just parallel the frame and be a grid or be boring, you know. So you can see this one on the right is something later when I'm still doing Gamel's academic way of working, and you've seen all these things. I'm not, except for the red man on the left. These are all things I've shown you, but they're in chronological order from left. Oops, from left to right. And so this is first, then that one second. And I can assure you, I didn't know much about composition. You can see it yourself probably, but I did understand the idea of a power center. This is trying to be interesting, but it's sort of smack right in the middle of the picture. And and the same thing here, trying to make a center, a spot beyond which nothing else can overwhelm. And that's pretty standard old stuff that you find. Maybe you find words. I mean, the center of interest is not one of those things that isn't out there in your reading. So, but the evolution of composition is so methodical and slow. You just look at things, you try things, and you gradually build a vocabulary. So, Annican, I don't know that I can tell you that I did anything brilliant except try to be interesting. And of course, I had some idea of trying to make things sort of go together, And I did have at this point, for whatever reason. By the way, I got to Gamel with I'd never arranged a still life except on my own, piled grapes up or something like that. But this idea of overlapping and creating new abstractions by the overlap, by new interesting areas, by the overlap of objects, one over the other, really a big deal. But this is just the beginning of my thinking. It's the beginning of my understanding. And again, still, it's mostly by looking. I don't remember hearing any words like of the sort that I use when I teach. But yeah, and then the next one is this one. And again, this is the power area of the picture. That is a strong area of the picture. This was an opportunity I had because I was working in a restorer's, and he had two things. He had a screen that had belonged to Paxton, and I'm going to get my laser up here. And he had these two red men, presumably Japanese or Chinese figures. I think Japanese. Sort of samurai-looking things, temple guards, who knows what. And he was restoring those, and I was working for him at the time, actually. I don't remember working on either of these. And, so he was patching holes in these things, which were made out of wood, and then repainting them. I was his paint matcher, which is a typical thing for a student to be. And so, I don't know what else to tell you, except here I'm beginning to use silhouette in a more lost and found sort of a way. And then by the time I get to this one, which is bunches of years later, I'm into something that's more obviously the game of spotting and distribution of colors and effects and all those sorts of things, and really getting names for everything that I have. I don't think back here I could have given you much of a name for even the color distribution. The idea of reds picking up reds, I couldn't have. I don't think I had a name for most of these things. That's really a huge thing if you want to control composition. Make sure you name stuff, right? Like the idea of creating pattern, or the idea of centers of interest, power areas of a picture, and the ideas of the colors. For some reason, I already seem to have had the idea that a color, maybe somebody did say something at some point, but having a triad, red, yellow, blue, or yellow, orange, green, whatever, as you see here. So that was already happening at that time, whatever else I knew. So let's just go on and look at the pictures that was influenced by or that I liked. And this is just going to give you an overview, Annican, of pictures I like. Let me go back to your question. Make sure that what would be my top picks for strongest design and composition in paintings? One of the things I want to tell you is I don't have top picks as composers. I can tell you a couple guys like Jerome, who I think probably had the greatest mastery of the overall of all the ins and outs of the language of design. The language of composition. He's the guy that uses the expression every picture has a main line, and but his work is to me it's the most most frequently really good in design, and so he would be probably a top guy. But he's standing on the shoulders of giants like Titian and Raphael, but so I try, but I still find that even you look at Titian, and man, some of the stuff he does is really iffy. And you'd simply say, in terms of common sense, a bunch of it's just flat out wrong. things you actually learn over time, best practices in composition. And so, among other things, for example, having a figure glued to the edge of a painting, to the edge of a frame, things like that. Although, always give these guys credit because, the pictures I show, like the entombment or the sacred and profane love, there's nothing about these things that is as impressive as any design you'll ever see. But there's a couple in his life that are the strong ones, and that's all I tried to live on, and I tried to do that with all the other guys. Raphael had a big reputation. Let me just look at these guys now. So instead of saying this is the great painter, I try to say let's just look at great paintings, and live in the sense of just like load yourself up, like wall to wall pictures that you believe are really impressive. And I don't look at pictures that make me cringe. I just hide. I don't. They don't pass the sniff test. That is, before you come in the room, you can tell they're screwed up. And I don't want to spend time trying to figure out how they're screwed up as much as right now when you're young, especially as much as you want to get the models of what great design. Get a feeling for great design by having them around you all the time. So let's see if I can get us over to this. Is really being slow today, huh? So there's Titian and the Entombment. And so these are pictures and painters that I hold in high esteem as far as design goes. And this is very early stuff. There are other guys, by the way, I'm not including in this. You can't include everybody, but these are the ones that came to me and the ones I typically use in my composition workshops. These are the types. But this is Titian, the Entombment, which is, I'd love to see that one in person. It's one that I have not seen. And so I don't believe, I have my doubts this picture is this dark, but I've seen some light ones that I know they can't possibly be right either. I do like the mood of it being dark, but the inky blacks just don't make sense to me. So there's that, and this really isn't intended to be a lecture on composition, so they should just take it for what it's worth. These are some of those that I hold up there, and they seem to stay on the top shelf. And there's Raphael. I can mention to you that he must have picked this up from Veronese, this wonderful distribution of colors. The idea is the red play and the turquoise or whatever that blue is playing around. Just based on this picture, I'm sort of not impressed with the lack of color in the Christ figure, but design-wise, having your best colors in and around the center is probably wise. I would love it if there was a piece of red somewhere on on Christ. And of course, you never know what's been lost over time, but that's one of those that fits into that category. One of Raphael's that I hold high is more so than other people hold other ones. I mean, I'm not that much of a fan of the School of Athens, even though it is special. And I'm just saying that there are other ones that impress me more. So that's Raphael. This is Poussin. Poussin was in the eyes of all those 19th century painters, the early 19th century painters. Poussin is roughly born at the time Velasquez was born. And his work is, so his work had all that influence over time. Everybody who was a painter who said anything about composition, I believe I've seen more than a couple references to Poussin out of the mouths of some of the later painters, including Millet, for example. So he was taken as that great master of design. And this is one of those designs that actually has that curling, if you want to call it that curling, sweeping. Man, oh man, where did there it is, now it comes back. Everything is retarded today, Mr. Producer. What is that? So, but you're seeing this line coming up and repeating itself in a movement rather across this way. And it's a spiraling almost of smoke, as it were. And that's one of those great unifying lines that goes beyond the simple old pyramids. It has a certain sense of a pyramid, but it really isn't a pyramid in terms of its grand directions. But you could say it's a V, but it's got this curious, interesting tilt because of this guy and this guy. Anyway, but that's one of those. Poussin is one of those guys, and this is one of those pictures. And this one, of course, is in the same category. And I always think of this as the spinning wheel or the whirligig, or it has a look of almost a swastika or something. But it has which is the wave symbol, by the way, from way before the modern era. And so it could have been in his mind on some level, but the idea of all these guys plowing around, the idea of a rolling wheel or something like that, and so on. But anyway, but this has that quality of being, a tough, a tough problem, all pulled together into one grand Baroque tangle that actually feels like completely unified. So that's one. Rubens is a very good top designer. Vermeer is a designer, a really special designer. The quietude of his picture, number one, and then that second part is what I call the architectonic. That is that sense of being, people say that about many different painters, that the pieces are in exactly the perfect places, nothing could be moved. But this stuff feels like it has this funny feeling of being perfect, and it's not a perfectionist kind of perfect. It's just a quiet rightness. But the quietness of his pictures is one thing that always has appealed to me. And I'm talking about his best ones. There are a bunch of them that and I'm trying to do this with everybody. I really try to pick on the ones that I consider define them or put them up there on the ranks where you could say this guy is a great composer. Not It's not every picture because you're evolving. Everybody is developing their skills. Even if you're on the shoulders of giants, this is a long search for what composition. Just like in science, everything, the knowledge, that Newton was important for everybody to get to the next place. His way of thinking about gaining knowledge was hugely important, but the next place uses his information and then realizes, no, it's not like that. It's really more like this. And that's one of those reasons too, though, that you want to be thinking for yourself and observing, making your own observations and using your own judgments. And by the way, you should also remember that every time anybody looks at your pictures, the layperson who isn't educated, heaven help you, protect you from the people who are educated, but the ones who aren't, and I mean that because they always have their own angle. You can tell who judged a show because of which pictures they pick. They pick the ones that are like them. It's a very classic problem in jurying shows. But what was I saying about that? I lost that piece. You guys can rewind and find out what I missed, but I won't be able to tell you. But so, oh yes, I know. But so his work, the body of work that he did, there's this handful of paintings, that I'm thinking 3 or 4 paintings that really define this something special that he did. I'm not even sure all the time that painters fully are aware of that. I mean, that is to say, when they have what it is they've achieved at times. I like that comment by Pleissner that you can do lots. You live at a good level. You do lots of good paintings, but one day you do something special, and it almost sounds like he's saying, "And how'd that happen?" Kismet or whatever that is. So, but yeah, so this guy's got a very special place with that handful of pictures, and so does Chardin. And at this point, Chardin is definitely living under the influence of the Velasquez painterly painting mindset. Even Vermeer, as nice as he is, has a tendency to look like he was cutting things out, and then he did very refined work on edges. And I think the conversation, the Paxton conversation that got to Gamel regarding Vermeer, and we know he had it because he was involved in Hale's in the thinking through of material and Hale's research on the subject of Vermeer's paintings for Vermeer's book. But here's a guy that likes to just rough and tumble everything, and yet it has as much of a sense of order, actually, at the end of the day, as a Vermeer does. So there it is. And by the way, that's the still life thing. You could argue the one before that was the interior, other one's outdoors, landscapes, mostly figurative. And I delight in virtually everything this guy does. The distribution of the red, some of which are damaged by time, the distribution of the spots, just the curious and interesting ways in which he groups things. And he's definitely a grouping guy in the old school sense. Anyway, but so Chardin. And again, you really don't want to be picking this one guy and saying Chardin. I mean, Chardin has actually a tendency to, as it were, obey the rules. He has a tendency to be right in those ways that we know, especially when you start talking visual. And that's where, if you get to the visual world, you can actually start shaking old paradigms, like Degas having figures half out of pictures, which is, this famously unheard of in his day within the academic world for sure. But it was because he understood composition more profoundly, but also, like in the case in Chardin, you're becoming a considerably more visual painter at this point. And all of a sudden, those old rules, those simple rules about handsome groupings and that sort of stuff, don't have as much sway anymore. And you could, as Degas does, and this guy, and I always feel like Chardin is doing that, you can pull people's legs a little bit, meaning you can actually do more, you can do more stuff that isn't all in the pretty, happy, perfect model, but gives you that sense of life. So, no idea why my computer's so slow today. Corot fits into that, and I would have brought paintings by Claude Lorraine, because he was another one of the guys that obviously influences the Hudson River School and hugely the world of landscape painting. His pictures are very refined, impressive things in little and great ways. But and so, but the version of impressionism coming out of the Barbizon school that is Corot takes what I would call the best of that world and treats it rather more like Chardin, in that he has a way of leaving the life. He doesn't draw it to death. And that's a funny thing to say today, because everybody out there that's what they've decided is going to make them. They're going to draw things to death. You young guys in a sense, you ought to do that, but you really ought to learn something else too. And I remember we had that discussion. That was one discussion we did have in a number of classes, the art students, and that was the question of the magic, the it. What was that special thing that pictures also need to have? And of course, we at that time weren't being taught. There was no great drawing class or anything like that at the art students league. I don't know if there is now, but I think there might be something where they at least are having you do something like cast drawing or something. Don't put words in my mouth. I rather doubt that that's true, but I think I've seen something that suggests maybe there's a class that does that. And but this sort of lends that feeling of life, that sort of evasive, lost and found feeling, and yet the guy is profoundly right, and I'd say, frankly, in academic ways. This actually could be a Claude Lorraine, except it has that wonderful dither, that sort of lost and found gives it. And it, by the way, just for the sake of telling you, this is a sort of a classic. This treatment of there it is. This area, the big power area, where you first come into a picture, and then these friendly events happening within the scope, beneath the radar, shall we say, of the big event that attracted you over there. That's one of those places, by the way, where people get confused in my conversation when I'm saying the center of interest. I mean this, and I say this. You can often do this. You say you mean a spot like this, and yet there's a center of human interest. In the case of Lorraine, he's a good guy to look at, Claude Lorraine. And you'll see that where he really wants you to enjoy yourself is where these people stand, and I'm assuming, yes, there they are, under the tree and all that sort of thing. But the power center is a different discussion. He does talk about powering up a spot, and I do think he's getting it from Lorraine, and not letting there be any ambiguity about who's spot number one, and that's a visual phenomenon event. That's where the visual order thing really does significantly relate, if not actually evolve. And I'm a lover of the Utamaro, and there are other ones too, Hokusai, the Wave, I think that's his, or Hiroshige. There's a number of these guys who really do lovely things, but I find them more, somehow or other, less interesting, just as simple as that. There's a way in which this one is, and I do believe his dates are, I think he's 1600s. You better not quote me. That's when I should have looked up, probably. Utamaro, but he's having this influence on people like Degas when these prints start coming to the West. Oops. Oh, that's a good thing to know. Look at that. That's easier. All right. But you can see things like this happening with the Western academics as well. But you see the idea of the broken marks along this vase here, and the stripes and striations. You see him doing that repeatedly. So there's references, samenesses, if you want to call it that, types of things, very common to composition. But the total package, the red, yellow, blue, the colors, the taste in which the colors go together, The use of the yellows, the play of the yellows from the palest one to the green one to the warmer ones, and the whole marching through of the values of color X. This kind of stuff it's very Western, but it's just simply, it's a funny thing to say, but anybody with an eye who puts in the time thinking about composition is going to come to the same conclusions over time. And it's just that, you can get satisfied or you can keep on looking for what else. Keep remembering this is a relational world, though. Just keep remembering that. So when you see, and you'll read this in Western conversation with Western painters, good painters, but when you see a color in a picture, this or whatever, you'll expect it to show up again somewhere else in the painting. There'll be a variation. There'll be an extension, a weaving of those kinds of things. And so there's a relatedness issue, right? So even the stripes in here with its color remind you of the color up here in the stripes, but this takes on a different connectiveness to that. And just busyness itself, the busyness of a unit of value compared to others, those are also just phenomena, the idea of busyness. And this guy, that's just complex. That thing on the right there could be the outlet today. That could be the wall outlet for the electricity. I get that much of a kick out of this. And there again is a line that's so much like Poussin's, that what is that thing going on there? The grand sweeping thing that goes on in this picture, the main line, the drama of the great line, counterline, these things. Unity, by the way, this isn't me in some theory. In a painting, if it's only made of three things, which is color spots, which includes value spots, and locations on the page, which is a spatial idea, and suggests any kind of movement. If you put a spot here and a spot here and a spot here, you're going to have a curve, right? You're going to have a line. Well, so the unity in a picture has got to be in those three classes. So this isn't my invention. This is the nature of what we're trying to hang together. And if you keep remembering that a painting is just spots, and stop thinking it's people. I mean, the people thing is not unimportant, but it's not where the dance comes from. It's not that your job is not to organize people. That's secondary. If you can organize people all day, but if the spots don't work, if the distribution of spots is out of balance and all that sort of stuff, you don't have a good picture. You may have a storytelling thing, but you don't have a good picture from the classic great composition point of view. So, let's try it this way. No, it didn't work. 2 fingers. My computer is being recalcitrant. Okay, but when you get to the academics in the West, and they're called academics, I don't call it that. Really, it's the academies, the people who taught. This guy's the Beaux-Arts, the head of the Beaux-Arts. This is Jerome. And I do think Jerome is the most consistently great designer in Western, I think in Western art. I think that's Annican, you're looking for some extreme statements. Take that one. Take that one seriously. But there's a good guy to think through and watch what he does. And then, like unto him, is Leighton. How the heck did I lose a picture here? You can't do that. No. Where's my Leighton picture? No. So with apologies, Leighton has disappeared off the page. Huh. Well, wasn't that fun? So let's just jump over to Degas. Again, I suggest to you that Degas has taken all sorts of, I think, of truths of the history of design, and he's made them his own. And I think he's one of the greatest owners. Say like he's glib. He's taken this, and by the time he gets to this point here, he's so glib with the ideas associated with what makes design, what design is, that it's very difficult to actually. The difference between Jerome and this guy and Degas might be just that difference, right? I mean, Jerome's like a school, he's like a schoolboy. Degas is like in other words, he's like a scholar of design, and this guy is like the athlete of design. He's like the great performer. He gets all the same stuff, and then he goes on to adventure mode. And you don't really ever get that. I never get that sense from, and of course it could be just execution, but I never get that sense from Jerome that he's actually into adventuring. But Degas does something beyond which I don't think anybody ever gets, and that is color design. And I mean to say, he really respects color, gets the glorious joy out of color play, and does it consistently. And again, with as with all other painters, take his top, you could take with him probably more top 10, 15, 20 paintings, maybe more, as I said. And like Jerome, it's a big body of work that's good. And, and not get tired of uncovering more of the mysteries of design. Keep remembering, as I say, you get to the Impressionist, and everybody is talking about it's this to this and that to that. I keep on quoting this guy, Degas, talking about this guy Humbert, who has his student sight-sizing a picture, painting his objects. He's still life side by side with his painting, the actual painting itself. And he says, "What's the matter with this guy? Doesn't he know it's an art of relations?" This is the work of a guy who understands it's an art of relations. And the difference, in some degree, between him and Jerome is that he takes liberties with the figure. In other words, he isn't trying to. He actually find, and this is characteristic of color thinking, and Ang mentions it, but he isn't finding himself locked into careful, articulate, fine drawing. And I suspect that has something very much to do with that it impedes the color dance, as Ang says it will. So it's an interesting thing, though. But you can feel the articulation when you look down and say, if I can get my red back again, where are you? Where are you, mister? I keep losing my pointer. But when you start looking down a line like this is a very articulate, well thought through line, and so you can see, and you can see he's not messing around when he wants one like that, but. Or in fact, even in the draftsmanship of the form of this, what would be a tree, which is probably a painted fake tree for the stage, and so you see he's got all the draftsman's skills, but he's actually got a different motive. His motive is actually really making the colors sing, really bringing the joy of color way up. It's almost like a piece of sound that was never, or a new instrument in the symphony that was never heard before, and just sort of changes everything. So, and then there's Whistler. I mean, I'm sorry, Homer. Whistler, I'm hard pressed to say that about, although I do respect him. He does have a couple, and they aren't Whistler's mother. But Homer is consistently doing that adventure thing with spots and values and distribution in the abstract. And there's a certain point at which he really comes into his own, and this is one of those. And I think this may be at the Clark Museum in Williamstown, Massachusetts. He plays in subdued notes. His range of colors is a little bit like Millet's, very limited, fairly limited. He loves these really rich browns that tend toward purples, and the greens, the deep water greens, and so it's not at all unusual. And then when they aren't doing that, they're doing some other similar sort of minor variation. But this is the adventure of the abstract here. The distribution of spots of light, say for example, or spots of value, and the movements of value and all that stuff. But this is one of those guys, and I do, I think highly of Sargent. I'm going to show you that in a second. But there's something about this work, the particular work of in this little period for Homer, that has an element of what I call poetry in it, and I almost mean it in the sense of Virgil or something like that. But there's a poetic essence that I don't ever really find in the hard-charging Sargent. So what I mean by that, I almost think of the something like The Old Man and the Sea, which I know isn't a poem, but or the epic Melville, Moby Dick, or something like that, which really still doesn't fit it. But there's something here. This is rich poetry, and this is when I say poetry, this is what I mean. It's something. This is it. Something about the profound ways in which it's a piece of nature, and it evokes that in itself evokes this sensation, which is a factor in all this sort of stuff. But it's not overtly, this is the rock and there's the boat, as much as it's just simply done with colors and values and distribution. Well, of course, and all the rest, of course, always. One of the things about representational painting is you can't escape from your subject. And if you disrespect it and just do spots, you know that modern painting, abstract painting, has never been popular, and it probably never will be, except to the extent it's beautiful in the decorative sense, and then it's always going to be as popular as that kind of work ever was. which is why I talk about Georgi Kepich from time to time, because his color stuff can frequently be very not only evocative of nature, but really beautiful in colors and textures. So, and now we'll see if we can get to the next picture. My retarded screen today. Oh yeah, so I love and this is something that Sargent also did, because that's the art, what I'm calling the Art Nouveau line. This is John White Alexander, and yeah, and he's done a number of these pictures, but that's an evolution of an era, right? And Sargent was also participating in that thing, so much like the influence of the Baroque and the big formy rolling, whatever you call those, tubular masses of the Rubens era. This guy is doing this great long line in the articulation of events, this sort of long, graceful thing, and then the articulation of events somewhere near the. Where are you? Come on. I'm having trouble with my work. There it is. I wonder why that's doing that with my arrow today. But this is Isabel and the Pot of Basil. Is actually based on a poem, and it's also got like a very heavy mood, because sadly that's the head of her boyfriend in there, and the basil is growing in it nicely. A little bit on the dark side, macabre side actually. Boccaccio is a macabre writer of poetry, a certain Italian type. And but anyway, you can feel the great unity of one great idea, linear idea. As I said, like the sort of the power center and this great sweeping thing, and then picking up another area. So yeah, that's a superficial way of describing it, but you just feel it. You just feel it. These things work. I like this. I like a lot of Innes's work in the tonalist work, and even John White Alexander is considered a tonalist by some. At times he really looks like it, but but Innes is a special kind of guy, and again he brings some very mystical sense as well. But I suppose that could be a factor in me liking this picture, because it's got some things that I probably wouldn't do that way, like this chopping out of this square unit over the end here. I feel it's a problematical, and I'm not sure exactly what I would do with it. That's just the thought. But there's something so special about this in the sense of scale, and you can see some of this in some of the Hudson River School stuff. And actually, one of you guys sent me stuff. What was the guy's name? He sent me from Australia. Wonderful sense of grandeur, and so some of those things are factors in my pleasure. But again, put them side by side. And what you're going to find, when your top 20 is all done, this may or may not be in there. And as a total body of work, I don't know. I don't think design. I think there's something else that he's doing that's more mood reflective than simply the idea of two-dimensional design on a screen. All of which are important in a picture. What did I lose? I'm staying with I think he's considered a tonalist, one of the California painters. And this is Arthur Matthews, and his wife Lucia worked, I think, on these and on her own. They were all part of the arts and crafts movement, that decorative movement. But I've always liked this particular picture. It's back to the old school of cutout shapes, but it's got this fantastic sense of movement, really, really beautifully countered by these lines here. But there's a great sense of movement from here and out and up. There's sort of a spiraling, if you want to call it that, fascinating abstractions, but just hanging together in a way that is, especially considering it's cut out and flat. Flat in the sense, by the way, that you might be wanting to keep it flat if you're a mural painter. And he was at times, so who knows where this was, but you can see the whole design of the frame and everything that went with it. So there's a guy I like to hang up there a little bit. Not every time, but and any number of these newer guys are picking up, are pulling in data, or data. I shouldn't say data, pulling in knowledge on multiple levels. Doing that work. So Pleissner, who's a little bit younger, young as Gamel, not as the other arts and crafts guys are a bit older. Are doing. This is Pleissner, and he just has this feeling at times for the great line. And this is just one of those examples. Some pictures have this, some don't. This has something, you think of Hokusai and some of those guys, the Japanese. This has got some of that thing going on, that great, beautiful sweeping line plowing through the picture, and the dance of the tree line. as again, if you look at a lot of Corots, I have recently, for my students, gotten the biggest kick out of. But yeah, this is fascinating stuff. And again, down to what we think of the center of people interest. So there's a cart going down here, but the big story gets you in, and then it dwindles down to maybe bringing you up the road down to where you can see a cart or something like that. Is it a pony? Yeah, maybe something. It's not a Ford. And so on. So that's Pleissner. And what else did I have there that I lost? Oh, this isn't good. I lost a couple shots. But I think that'll be it. Annican, hope this helps you in some way with your thinking about composition in the studio. In the classroom, I just wanted to be strongest design and composition in paintings. Yeah, so these are guys that are, to me, really hold the place of some of the very strongest things. They're certainly in a class with those that do. And that's probably a better way to think about strong paintings. To classify them to some degree, because all paintings aren't the same. For example, when I talk about Degas, to classify the color, the best color work, those which actually are the best color designers, and so that creates a class of its own. So you have Veronese. Gamel used to make that argument, and it was made around him that Degas was always interesting, and his color was good, but it wasn't as, in some way or other, Veronese was still the god. I think Gamel does that with Velázquez being still the greatest impressionist, even though I think the Boston School guys are actually doing his thing just with a little bit more in a certain way. More, you might say more unity in the way of working, way of thinking. Whereas he's coming, whenever you're sort of a split personality coming out of an academic, shall we say, model and moving into a visual model, if it's your evolution, you're not going to be as good as you would have been if you'd started in that model based on somebody else's stuff and then just found your own version of that model and really pulled it together. But I get the sense that the Boston School guys were much more like that. They had a sense of this other way of working, like the Velázquez stepping stone, the shoulders of Velázquez to stand on, and I think they really brought it together just a bit more than Velázquez ever did. But those kinds of thinking are always there when you're wondering about composition. All right, Annican, I better get out of here. That was an interesting question, and I think you asked some other ones too. I could, if you're the only one still left around, I could talk about Viridian, but we could do that in person, so or online sometime. But why Viridian? Why get the green Viridian? And there's a version to Viridian, but anyway, okay. Another day for the rest of those. That was fun. All right, guys, enjoy your few days, and I'll see you maybe on Thursday. This probably is going to be Sundays, so I'll see you on Thursday. All right. Oh, don't forget to subscribe, share, comment, everything. If there's a place to like, please like, and so on. Yeah. Thank you all for your donations and for your other gifts. I've had a couple people send me books. It's really nice. Some of the books you've sent me are those which some you apparently have had. Well, either you've had just found and decided that they belong more to me than you, or you have maybe excess in your files. But I really have appreciated having those, and my students have. I put them right on the shelves. They go out there for everybody else to use. So I hope that's appreciated. Anyway, but thank you in any case. And anyway, have a good week. See you next time.